Welcome to the Putback here on SNY.TV. I am Ian Begley, SNY's NBA insider, and we're going to be talking Knicks for the next half hour or so. Got two great guests with me. I've got the New York Post's Zach Braziller, has covered the team extensively at home, on the road this season. And I've got Jonathan Macri, who you all know, I'm sure, but if you don't, Dean of Knicks Film School, and has covered this team every day. Just written about it, talked about it, done videos about it. He's all over the Knicks. So these two have a great inner knowledge of this team, and we're going to have a lot of fun. Maybe not fun, but we're going to do a good job digging into what's going on here with this club. And Zach, before I get started, we were on the same flight home from Miami, 7 a.m. flight. And did you hear like loud snoring? Because we were near each other. You heard
I think that was me.
That was you? Dude, I heard it. The first time I heard it, I thought like there was an engine issue with the plane. I thought we were going down. That was serious, man. I respect it. That was impressive. All right, so that was Zach. We know who it is. So Zach, I'm going to start with you because I want to know Heat series, Cavs series. What has stood out to you as the biggest or one of the biggest differences with this team, first round series to second round series?
I think you got to point to just what has happened in the paint. I don't think there's any question about it. You know, Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein absolutely dominated the Cavs. They controlled the glass. They intimidated Cleveland. And in this series, they've gotten, to me, severely outplayed, but specifically Robinson, who I think is really bothered by a hip. I think the hip is really limiting him. I can't ever remember him being on the floor so much and him making such a little impact as he has in this series. Bam Adebayo is absolutely cooked in the last two games, absolutely dominated inside. I'm not looking to give Mitch excuses. I just see a guy who's not moving well. I see a guy who's kind of late, who's maybe cheating a little because he knows he doesn't have that lateral quickness that he usually has. But to me, that's been the story. The Knicks have actually been beaten on the glass the last two games. You can point to injuries. You can point to them not shooting the ball well. You can point to hustle and all that. But to me, it's just they've gotten outplayed in the paint, which is not something I expected to happen in this series.
Yeah, I hear you. And John, what about you? What's glaring for you? Difference, between Knicks Cavs and Knicks Heat?
I think, coming into the first round, yes, the Knicks were the underdog, but I think they had a good bit of confidence going into that series. I understand they beat Miami 3-1, just like they beat the Cavs 3-1 in the regular season. That said, the Cavs were a young team. Other than Donovan Mitchell, none of them had really been there before. And right from the opening game 1 in Cleveland, the Knicks approached that series like they felt like they were the better team. They felt like they were the team that was supposed to win that series. And even when things were not going their way, I mean, they only shot, 30% from three in the Cavs series, and it didn't stop them from winning, 4-1. They never got unnerved. And I think that's because they knew deep down, like, hey, we're more poised than this team. We're more polished than this team. We have a game plan that can beat this team. In this series, I feel like we are witnessing one team that has a level of poise and experience that comes from experience, and then they rely on that experience, having made a finals run recently and a run to the conference finals, and a coach and star players and role players, quite frankly, that don't get rattled if things are maybe going a little sideways. Whereas for the Knicks, and I think it typified in the last two games of Miami, just an overall lack of ability to execute and stick to some of the things that got them to where they were all year.
Yeah, I mean, just to say something different, because I agree with both of you guys. I think the depth, I thought coming into this series, the Knicks' depth would have been a strength because obviously Heat, without Tyler Hero, without Victor Oladipo, the depth for them, on paper at least, was not there. So I thought this would be the Knicks' chance to, again, showcase their depth and to have that be an advantage. It hasn't been at all. And I'm just surprised to the degree that Miami has had the edge in bench players, in role players. I did not see it coming to this degree. I mean, we talked a lot about a Kyle Lowry, Cody Zeller pick and roll that was hurting the Knicks in game 3. It got to it a little bit in game 4. That's not a series of words that I expected to be saying that much, at least in 2023. Yeah. But Kyle Lowry's been fantastic. And Zeller's done a really good job in his role. And just the Heat role players have outplayed the Knick role players. Heat bench has outplayed the Knick bench. And to me, that's one of the big takeaways here through the first 4 games. And Zach, let's get to Julius Randle. Seems to be, he's always a polarizing figure with Knick fans. A lot of people, at least based on what I've seen on Twitter, a lot of Twitter users upset with his effort, upset with the energy and the speed at which he rotates on defense and challenges shots. And I just want to hear your take on what you've seen from Randle in this series and specific to those areas.
I mean, I think it's completely fair for him to be criticized. You can go back to the Cavs series, game 4, where Tom Thibodeau had to bench him in that fourth quarter because Randle's, effort was to me was so lacking. Now, you want to say the ankle is still bothering him or he's conserving energy. I just don't think the extra effort has been there on a consistent basis. Now, look, there are plays where it is, but it's not consistent enough. And you always hear Tim say, like, if it's lacking from one guy out there, it messes everything up. And I think that's really been the issue for the Knicks. The Heat, to me, the Heat have been getting all the loose balls, all the hustle plays, kind of giving that extra effort. And there are times when the Knicks have 3 or 4 guys doing it, but not all 5. And that one guy who doesn't do it kind of changes everything. And I'm not saying it's Randle every time, but to me, the Randle effort on a consistent every play basis on the defensive end hasn't been there. And there are plenty of clips you can see from these 2 games in Miami where it hasn't been there. And I think the frustrating thing is he has the ability. Jalen Brunson's not a great defensive player. He's limited physically. He's going to it's just the way it is. Randle has the physical capacity to be a great defender, and he just doesn't do it consistently. And look, I mean, there are a lot of Knicks fans that are down on him. It goes back as well to 2 years ago where he really did perform well. He's had a ton of turnovers in this series, especially the last 2 games. He's their all-star. He's the guy, and the criticism he's facing to me is warranted. And I think it's something that the Knicks have to really look at in this offseason is can they get to the next level with him?
And Zach, I'm happy you brought up the comparison with Jalen Brunson because a lot of people will turn around and they'll say, well, like you just said, Jalen Brunson's not a good defender either. But I'll steal a point. I love stealing points from my colleagues. Benji Ritholtz made this point last night when we were watching, which is like, it's one thing when a guy is limited physically. Jalen Brunson is a small guy. There's only so much he could do. Only so well he could move. Like you pointed out, we've seen Julius Randle be, I'll go so far as to say, at times almost like a borderline exceptional one-on-one defender. I don't know if we could go that far as being an exceptional team defender, but he's at the very least been a passable team defender. I mean, think back, even during this year, like the game where they played the Clippers, and he took Kawhi Leonard, all NBA level player, one-on-one defensive assignment down the stretch of that game, and did a really nice job. He has that ability in there. So when fans like me see the poor closeouts, the missed rotations, lack of attention to like just getting in a stance, not putting a hand up, and then you throw in the couple of plays last night where it's okay. There's a turnover on the Knicks side of the court, and there's a Knick running back, and both times the initial attempt by the Miami Heat at their basket failed. If Julius Randle had made a 110% effort to get back into play, might have prevented the Heat from scoring on one or both of those. He's there with his arms up on the other side of the floor still, late coming into the picture. I think that's the stuff more than anything that gets under people's skin, to say nothing of the fact that he's still a, sub 40% career shooter in the playoffs. And, that's an issue, even though he shot it well last night.
Look, I know a lot of people at this point, Knicks down 3-1, season basically over, unless there's some miraculous comeback. Want to know what's next and what are they going to do and who do you trade and what's the next move. And they look at Randle. I shouldn't say a lot of people, Twitter users, because I don't want to overstate like the 7, 8, or 9, 10 loud people on Twitter to make it seem like it's some huge group of Knicks fans. But I would assume it's representative to some degree of the fan base. I know that a couple of weeks before the trade deadline, there was something where somebody had talked to the Knicks about some potential deal involving Randle, and they wit told at that time, Julius is not getting traded, period. It's not going to happen. He's here. Look, things change in the NBA, but it was stated as like he's solidified himself as a part of us, and we want him to be a part of us. So do the Knicks change their thinking heading into this offseason? I don't know. I think, Zach, when you bring up the idea that you know what Julius can give you and you know what his ceiling is, I think that's an opinion that's shared by some in the organization, and the idea that, hey, like this is what we're getting, and can we maximize that? How do we maximize it is what the Knicks are trying to do right now. But do some people see that and say, look, we need more from our number 2 guy, our number 1 guy, so let's figure something out. There's a lot that could be on the table, this summer, just around the league. People are talking about, this being potentially a lot of fireworks in the trade market. The Knicks, we know, have the gunpowder to make something happen. And, it's just, I think those permutations are only natural to think about. But I do know, again, a couple weeks before the deadline, it was not even a thought with the Knicks, and then from somebody high up, and they made it sound like, no, not now, and not, in the foreseeable future. So just a little context on the Randle situation. Now let's go to Jalen Brunson, who, look, I think he hasn't shot it well. He's looked a lot different to me from Cleveland series to Miami series. Zach, I want to hear your take and your assessment on Jalen Brunson so far.
I mean, I thought he was fantastic last night, especially obviously on the offensive end. I mean, 32 points, 11 assists, 1 turnover. We know the Heat are hunting him on the defensive end, and he's limited defensively. We all know it. To me, it's one reason that the Donovan Mitchell trade probably didn't happen, and probably why it's the best thing it didn't happen, because neither guy is a very good defender, and I think it would have been very tough to win at a high level with that as your backcourt defensively. But I digress a little bit. I'm a huge Brunson fan. I covered him in college at Villanova. I think the guy is a flat out winner. I thought he's done everything he can under the situation against a really well coached team that has focused on him. He's clearly not been 100%. You can tell he doesn't have that burst, that quick first step. I think the ankle and the foot are bothering him maybe more than the Knicks are letting on. And I think he's done whatever he can to win this series. And I think Knicks fans should be absolutely over the moon that he is their point guard. I think he's one of the best moves the Knicks have ever made. You look at what he did in Game 2. You look at the Cleveland series. You look at even last night. I mean, if he had more help, that goes down as a heroic performance. He was great. Has he been great on the dance end? No, but that's just kind of who he is. But I think he's done everything he can in this series. And I thought in a game they had to win last night, he gave you everything. He gave you everything you could possibly ask for.
And John, what about you? What do you think of Jalen?
Look, the Knicks are going to have a lot of questions coming up this offseason. Maybe some questions after this series that we didn't anticipate that we were going to be asking before the series started. Jalen Brunson's not one of those questions. I completely agree with Zach. I think it is one of the best moves the Knicks have ever made. I think it is the most. I'll go so far as to say, I mean, look, I wasn't around when Ewing was drafted. I was a bit young at that time. I think I was 1 year old or 2 years old. So I'll just say, in my lifetime watching the Knicks, I think getting Jalen Brunson and getting him in free agency where you did not have to give up. Well, not they had to give up one draft pick, a second round draft pick, but but they didn't have to give up your traditional package of picks. You didn't have to give up any young players, and you're not even paying the guy a max salary. I would go so far as to say it is the most significant addition the Knicks have made in my lifetime watching as a fan, and that is not only for what he does on the court. I mean, Zach, you mentioned the stat line. I looked it up. Before him, there have been 24 guys in NBA playoff history that had over 30 points, 10 assists, and one or fewer turnovers in a game since the NBA started recording turnovers. And it's the guys you'd expect. It's Michael Jordan. It's Kobe Bryant. It's LeBron James. It's one MVP after another. Chris Paul has done it a bunch of times. This is the company, I think, now after this postseason in which he's averaging 25 points. I know on lower than usual efficiency, but again, he's playing through an injury. You reported this, Ian. It is everything you could possibly want in a leader. Can he be the best guy on a team that eventually wins the title? I don't even think that matters. You need two guys to go all the way. I think NBA history has proven as much. You need two. He's one of them. That much we can be confident in.
John, I'm just a little surprised. I thought you were cranking out the Knicks Film School daily newsletters back when the frozen envelope. I didn't know that you were
from the crib.
You were great writing, even as a 2-year-old. Fantastic. You were on top of it. But
thank you.
Yeah, Brunson. Look, he's not going to say it. The Knicks are not going to say it. But I know that it's obvious to everyone who's watching. He's much less than 100%, and he was getting significant, basically. Not hyperbole a little bit, but round the clock treatment to get back on the floor game 2. And a couple of Heat players just did not expect him to play in game 2 leading up to, that evening. So obviously, among players, there was a thought that he's not doing well and we'll probably won't have to see him tonight. And he's gutted it out. And I think that, that tells you a lot about what he's about, what he cares about, what he's willing to lay on the line for this team. And I think it might have been something more than just regular treatment that had to happen for him to get back on the court. But listen, I think that tells you a lot about Jalen Brunson. But I think, too, let's not discount the idea that Julius Randle is also pretty limited. Just by the calendar, he sprained his left ankle, sat 2 weeks, rushed back to get back to game 1, sprained it again. Within a 4-week time frame, he sprained that left ankle twice. It seems to me that he has to be at least somewhat compromised by it. And again, these guys are not going to talk about it. Maybe that's tactical. Maybe that's a pride thing. They're not going to let on about how compromised they are. But I think it is there. But yeah, the idea that Brunson is as Zach said, giving you everything you had, I think that has to make you feel good if you're a Knicks fan. Now, let's go to the coaching in this series. And, to me, just being around the sport a little bit, I hesitate to give a full analysis of what a coach is or isn't doing because so much goes into it that I'm not privy to, and that the public is not privy to. So I get it. You can base it on the bottom line results. That's what coaches are judged on. That's what everyone's judged on. But there's so much that goes into it that I hesitate to kind of put a blanket statement around this guy outcoached this guy. Zach, for you, what do you think Thibodeau, Spoelstra, and the coaching matchup so far this series?
I think Spoelstra is just absolutely fantastic. The Heat just felt like a step ahead of the Knicks this entire series. Now, I think part of that is they've fresher team. There's no question about it. You have certain guys there who load management, missed a lot of time with injuries. The Knicks just look a little tired right now. But the Heat are just so well prepared. Spoelstra might be the best coach in the NBA. And I know certain people are going to take that as, well, Thibodeau has not done a good job, which I think Thibodeau's a good coach. I think he's a top 10 coach in the league. I thought he completely outcoached Bickerstaff in the first round. He just might not be as good as Spoelstra, which to me is not a knock on him. It's more of a credit to how good Spoelstra is. The Heat just in this series, they've just been so on point with everything, whether it's their extra effort, whether it's their ball moves, just been absolutely incredible. Whether it's just, taking away Nick's strengths, they've just come off as just such an expertly coached team. And the Knicks, to me, some of it is underperformance. Some of it is guys being hurt. Obviously, no Quickly last night. The Knicks just haven't been on that level of crispness, of sharpness. And, I don't want to take that as a criticism of the coach, because I think Thibodeau has been very good here. Two out of 3 years in the playoffs, a series playoff win. He's really brought respectability back to this franchise. You obviously credit Leon Rose as well. This is now, to me, a team that people respect, that people kind of look at very differently than they did 3 years ago. But there's no question, Spoelstra's got the better of him in this series. I don't think you can deny that.
John, what about you?
I mean, Ian, you kind of took the words out of my mouth. As you may know from the post games that I do, when the Knicks lose or when the Knicks don't look good, the first finger of blame by most people gets pointed to Tom Thibodeau. And my pushback is always there is just, to judge it based on just like the 48 minutes of basketball that we see and to not know anything else that's going on behind the scenes, all the other things that a coach has to consider and deal with is unfair. I think Zach summed it up really well. I think Eric Spoelstra is, without question, the best coach in the sport, and I would argue the best coach that the sport has seen since, I don't know, you want to go back to Pop, you want to go back to, Phil Jackson, Pat Riley, but one of those sorts of names. Like he's in that echelon. I think he has an argument to be on the Mount Rushmore of NBA coaches when all is said and done. So there's no shame in Thibodeau, like, quote unquote, getting out coached by Spo. That said, something that I think people will think about in this series for a long time is Tibbs went with Josh Hart to start for 3 games. Now he went back to Grimes yesterday. Was that an admission of, it wasn't working, let me go back to something else? Did it work? The offense looked better, certainly. But then there's so many other things, like the Knicks are the worst 3-point shooting team in the playoffs out of 16 teams. Is that Tibbs, or is that just them not making shots? They've turned it over the second most times by percentage in the playoffs. Is that Thibodeau, or is that a young team figuring its way and, kind of lacking some of the necessary poise? It's tough for me to place a lot of that stuff on the coach, while also trying to be fair and noting that there are maybe some things that he could have done better.
I think very fair assessment from you, Jonathan. I think, though, like, big picture, right, with Tom Thibodeau, I'm not saying Leon Rose hired him for this reason, but generally, you guys have said it. He's a floor raiser. He's going to help you establish a foundation out of which to build. And so, to me, if Tom Thibodeau, for some reason, if the Knicks at the top, James Dolan, Leon Rose, William Westlake, I can't see it happening, right? But if for some reason they say, you know what, Tom, we got to move on from you. We got to look for somebody else. If he gets fired after this series, which again, not happening. He's done his job, and he's done his job well, because he was brought in to establish a foundation that you can build off of, and he's done that. Like, there's no arguing that. You can quibble, and we all have, with his in-game decisions, his lineup decisions, his rotations, and certainly that's fair game. But in a big picture sense, he has established this core of Knicks, and he's raised their value. You look at Emmanuel Quickly, and you look at RJ Barrett, and you look at these young guys, and I'm not saying Thibodeau deserves all the credit for the way that they have grown, but he's got to get some of the credit. He's the head coach. So there's things that he's done here that I think he's exceeded expectations when he was brought in terms of getting this together to the point where now the Knicks, you could argue, a move and a half, 2 big moves away from being a really, really strong team. So give Thibodeau credit there. Obviously, criticize him where you want in terms of this series and globally, but give him credit overall for where he's gotten this team. We've got a question here from Michael, who's joining us on YouTube. Thank you, Michael. What's the biggest reason for the Knicks record in this series? Is it talent, coaching, injuries, fatigue, or execution? Zach Braziller, what do you say?
I'm going to go with it's the opponent. I'm going to go with just running into a better team that is playing better. I know everyone's going to say, well, they were the 8th seed, look at their regular season, but this is a team that made the final in the bubble 3 years ago. They made the Eastern Conference Finals last year. Before the season, they were considered far superior to the Knicks. They probably, at least and how they've performed, had the two best players in this series in Jimmy Butler and Bam. They're a team that's they just beat the Bucks in 5. I think we'd be looking at the Knicks very differently if they were on the precipice of losing to the Bucks in 5.
Right.
I don't think anyone would be freaking out or being overly critical if they lost the series to the Bucks. Now you're losing, whether they lose game 5, game 6, if they don't win the series, people are going to, because the Heat were in 18 and had an underwhelming regular season. This is a team that's incredibly experienced, that's experienced with winning playoff series, which have a fantastic coach. I mean, playoff Jimmy Butler is probably at least a top 10 player in the sport, might be a top 5 player in the sport. I think it's more about just running into a really good team that got hot after, for whatever reason, they had a very underwhelming regular season. But I mean, if you would have told someone before the year that the Knicks and the Heat would play in the second round of the playoffs and the Heat would beat the Knicks in 5, I don't think anyone would be surprised by that.
Yeah, I think. My answer was going to be all of the above. That was answer choice G, or however many options there were. But I'm going to double down with what Zach said. I mean, let's actually take a step back for a second. Even with everything that had kind of gone wrong or sideways for the Knicks through 3.5 games, they went into the second half last night and they were down by 8 points, not a lot, and they came out in that third quarter on an opponent's floor, tough place historically to play in, and they made, I believe, 9 of 10 2-point shots. They finally found their groove. Their big-time players came out and started making big-time plays. Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, the aforementioned Julius Randle made some shots. They made a couple threes even. They did the thing that a good team does. They responded when they were down. And you know what the Heat did? Every time the Knicks punched them, they had to punch right back. And they had some tough shots. And the guys who were hitting those tough shots, it's all the undrafted guys that we've been seeing this whole series and saying, how does Miami find these freaking guys? Well, they find them and they coach them up and they get them in their system. And give credit to them. They took the Knicks punch. They dished it right back. And at the end of that third quarter, the Knicks were down by 1 more point than they were when they came into it. And then I think by the fourth, they were a little bit tired. But, I think you have to give credit to the opponent. To do anything else would be, I think, doing a disservice to what we've watched over the last 4 games.
I agree with both you guys, but I still go back to no Tyler Hero, no Victor Oladipo, no disrespect. Haywood Highsmith, he's in the rotation. There's guys in this rotation. Duncan Robinson was buried for much of the season. He's in the rotation. They're doing this with guys who were not really a part of the plan over the course of the regular season. Just remarkable from Miami's perspective, from New York's perspective. They had an opportunity here to get through, and it looks like they're not going to do it. And to me, just on paper and based on how they came out of that Cleveland series, they should have beaten this Heat team. And so they deserve some scrutiny. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Anyway, RJ Barrett, John, you mentioned you were talking about that run that the Knicks had. I believe RJ played a pretty big role in that.
He
Just
did.
For you, overall postseason, what have you learned about RJ Barrett?
Oh, I learned that he's a guy that I want to keep around for a long time, which is not something I thought that I would be saying, 3.5 weeks ago. I thought RJ Barrett had a really rough year. I know he put up some nice numbers. I know he had some stretches where he did some nice things. I thought he took significant steps back or not forward in enough areas that I was really concerned coming into this postseason. I thought, frankly, that these playoffs would be his swan song as a New York Knick. And look, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what trades are going to materialize on the offseason. But for him to now come out and really ever since those first 2 games in Cleveland, just be a dependable guy. And it's not only the shot making. XJ mentioned this on our post game last night. His decision making has been nearly flawless, really from the second half of the Cleveland series all the way on through these first 4 Miami games. And I think it's everything you wanted to see RJ Barrett kind of put together, show what he could be as an NBA player. It's still not perfect. There are some areas that, you wanted to improve upon, you wanted to clean up. But I think he's the guy that the Knicks have to consider, how can we continue to build around?
Zach, what about you?
Yeah, look, I'm a fan of RJ the person. I think he's real. I think he's accountable. I agree with you. He did not have a good regular season. There's no question about it. The shot was a concern, but I've been so impressed with his postseason, and to me, he's shown everyone that he's tough enough to be, a key part of a championship core here in New York. I don't think there's any question about it. When other stuff was going wrong for this team, you go back to that game 3 against Cleveland, when other stuff was going wrong, he's been a rock for this team. He's probably been their second best player in the playoffs after Brunson.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt. I mean, I know sometimes fans don't get to see the person, behind these players, and look, we get limited access to that as well, obviously now with how the Knicks operate. But I'm a fan of RJ the person. He's a guy that's been in the spotlight his whole life. He was obviously a big time high school prospect and number 3 pick and all this stuff, and he faces scrutiny. But he's a guy he's ultra confident in himself. He never, he doesn't make excuses. I remember this year, I forgot, I think it was a West Coast trip where he was like clearly sick, really sick, and he's playing through it. He's playing 40 minutes, and and he's not saying, "Well, I was sick." He's saying, "Like, I'm out there, I need to play better." I think the Knicks have a keeper, and look, he's 22 still. I think that's something that people forget. He's 22 years old. But yeah, I think RJ this postseason's been big, and he's really proven himself to be a long-term answer here as part of the core.
Yeah, I was just so impressed, man. Game 2, I think that Cleveland series, right? I think there was 3 days, between 2 and 3. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
And there was just so much noise just about RJ, his playoff performance to date. Should he even be on the floor? What's wrong? Let's get him out of here. The typical reaction to a player struggling in a big spot. He didn't flinch. He came back in game 3 and did what he did. And he's been pretty consistent since then in making winning plays and contributing in a positive way certainly on the offensive end and also the defensive end. So he's answered the call. And to me, he's answered most questions that you might have had about a player who 22 years old, about to start a big extension here in New York. Answered a lot of questions about where he fits with this club moving forward. And with regard to his regular season, the one thing that's on my mind is I think you give him some credit for taking a step back and allowing Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle to take over the offense in some ways. Take a lot of shots. They were getting their shots. They were obviously was successful, but RJ was not getting in the way of that. And I think you got to give him some credit there. Now let's turn to Wednesday, gentlemen. The numbers, I have the numbers here. All right. So less than 5% of teams that have faced a 3-1 deficit in the NBA playoffs, and there's been about 270 of them, have come back to win that series. Let's start with Wednesday. What do the Knicks need to do, John, in your mind, to get this thing back to Miami on Friday night?
Play with more poise. I know that's a very big statement, but I think there is a way to relate most of the mistakes that they've made, not only in Game 4, but throughout the series, to just a lack of poise. Don't double unnecessarily. Don't frantically double if you get caught in a pick and roll action to the point where you're putting everybody else in crazy rotations and you're not able to make up ground. Don't take low percentage 3-point shots early in the shot clock. Don't isolate against Bam Adebayo or Jimmy Butler. Don't turn the ball over 17 times. Don't look at your teammate and have your teammate look at you as the ball drops out of bounds. Like things like this that the Knicks, I think, did a really good job of. They picked all the low-hanging fruit throughout the regular season, and they have not done so in this series. If they could just play a sound, clean game, I think they will be able to score enough. Even with their poor 3-point shooting, I think they'll be able to score enough to at least get back to Miami for a Game 6, and then who knows what happens from there.
Zach, what about you?
I want to see them, everyone, not 3 or 4 guys at a time. I want to see everyone treat this like a do-or-die game. That means attacking these games the way Miami has, especially Miami. That means coming out breathing fire. That means diving for the ball. That means giving that extra effort that they really have only done in game 2 in this series. They've been outworked. There's no doubt about it for most of this series. And you can look, if they hit 16 threes again, yeah, they'll probably win. But to me, it's about playing with desperation and treating this is like it is. And that's everybody. Because it's not fair to say every single guy on this team isn't doing it every play, because some are, but not everyone. And if not everyone's doing it and you're not all connected, it's going to show. And that to me has been the biggest thing, is the Heat have just been so connected on both ends, so tied together. And that's really what the Knicks were all regular season. That's what they were in that Cavs series. And we haven't had that. Now you want to say maybe it's injuries with Brunson and Randle and now quickly out, and you're seeing different combinations, and there are a million things you could point to. But that to me is what you want to see tomorrow. Is a connected, tied together team that's going to lay it all out on the line. It's going to treat this like it as a must-win, do-or-die game, and that losing is the end of the world to them. Because I haven't seen that in 3 of these 4 games.
That's a great point. That's a good litmus test for the club Wednesday. If they do make it to Game 6 back in Miami, Zach, if you book an early morning flight, just let me know and I'll book something else. Zach, you've done a great job covering this team like a glove all season, all playoffs. So be sure to check out Zach's work in the New York Post. Jonathan Macri, you already know, fantastic analysis, fantastic perspective on the team. And I have to say, you and Benji Ritholz have done some great podcasts breaking these games down right after the game or in between games in the series. It's been really, really fun and informative to listen to. So be sure to check that out. We will be back either season wrap-up or between games here in this series. We're not sure yet. Depends on what happens Wednesday. But be sure to stay with us for the next episode of the Putback here on SNY.TV.